cool. So we could just like go ahead and jump on in. So it's like
Yeah.
super stoked we all got to connect again. I'm going to be doing most of the talking here. Ryan Fick, our lovely producer with newly added mustache to the face, which I'm very happy about, is going to be behind the camera and the boards, making sure everything goes well. And then I'm joined by David and Jessica. So I usually give intros on people, but I realize it's so much better to let people do that themselves. So why don't you guys just give me a little rundown? Give me a little what's up about who you guys are, you know?
Sure. You want to go first?
Sure. Yeah.
Ladies first.
My name is Jessica. I am an animator. I have been animating for over 8 years now, close to 10 years. I have both worked in TV, film, and most recently as an Imagineer at Walt Disney Imagineering on the animatronics for the rides. And now I'm just recently back in feature, and that's about it. How about you?
That's about it.
My name is... That's about it.
Yeah.
The end. My name is David Badro, and I am also an animator. I've been working in animation in various ways for over 10 years now, I think, and in television and in features primarily. And I've held a number of jobs from layout to art to mostly animation now. Yeah. And have jumped around to a variety of different studios and whatnot, and lived in different cities for that. So is Jess, and so yeah.
Yeah, and I think you guys have a really fascinating portfolio, and like something that I always love to talk to people about. When most of the time when I meet people who are full time, especially in animation, they tend to go wherever the passion leads them. Like when I talk to Mike from who's from DNA and from Nickelodeon, it's like he's been in Dallas and California and Cincinnati, and I feel like it kind of adds this nomadic quality when you're doing something like animation. So, what's your guys' thoughts on that? Like, I mean, you guys really you're in California now. I mean, and you've been a bit all over the map. Do you guys go wherever the job is, or is it like passion leads you somewhere? Do you have something in mind? I mean, you're in like the hub of where your industry is right now. What's your thoughts behind that?
I think we actually have two different thoughts on that. But it just happened to bring us together. From my perspective, I would always like to be when I first started out, I wanted to be in a stable position. So I was quite solid in where I was in Vancouver. But my perspective changed when I wanted to follow what made me happy. And sometimes that would lead me to a certain position, or it would lead me to a certain location. So I often follow where I know my life will be in a good balance. And sometimes that means I might settle down for a while, and sometimes that might mean I'll be jumping around a little bit. And I think some people at the beginning of their careers really want to pursue certain studios, certain directors, and sometimes specifically certain cities. But for me, it's always just been where I happen to follow my happiness, and that just has happened to lead me to a few different cities. But I think
and that's the ideal, though. I mean, to touch on a bit more before David shares his thoughts on it, I think that's like the way it should be, but it's so hard to actually marinate in that lifestyle. Like for me, Ryan and I both are kind of that way. It's like there's something delicious about the ambiguity of being creative. It's like I don't know where I'm going to be in a year, but I know where I am right now, and I'm loving it. And like it's the reward outweighs the risk, and very few jobs can do that. But it is a strange landscape. So I'm happy that you've managed to figure that out. I mean,
it's taken a while, but it can change.
I feel like a lot of people coming out of school or out of high school, whatever it is, when they want to pursue arts, it's often difficult for them to like go fully gung-ho with passion pursuit, because usually to appreciate that balance and that desire for such things, you have to know what it's like to do corporate bullshit and to just do a job where your creative freedom's a bit sacrificed. So dude, stoked for that. Total kudos for that. I'm stoked that you're able to do that. And then David, you guys have two different mindsets on it? Like how did
probably slightly different, but I would say mostly the same. I think that well, it's funny also that you say that like we're kind of in the hub of it here in LA, but I think that for when you're on more of we're sort of more on the production side of things, meaning specifically we are sort of in the trenches. Like we're the people that actually make the images, as opposed to writers and directors and whatnot, where I would say when you're on that side of thing, which some people call front end, LA is more of a center for that, where a lot of the major production and writing and directing, I'm confusing the term production here, so I apologize. But the sort of like the more, ground zero genesis, creation part of it happens here in LA, whereas, animators and the rest of the production pipeline used to be mostly in LA, but like over the last 10 years, it's sort of become decentralized. And so it's really been spread out across not only all of America, but around the world.
Especially with animation, right? Like I know a lot of the times we have storyboarding happening in-house in the States, and then we see things get rendered like overseas, even like in Japan and things of that nature. And I find that fascinating. And I think, and again, the way we do this, I don't really have much of a format, so when it pops in my head, I will bring it up. I think COVID-19, we talk about the hub of what LA is, and especially with the production process, COVID-19 has really rewritten the rules. And to speak on, like, again, you started your career at South Park, David, and they did something super unique during this pandemic era of like making a full-on like hour-run episode completely remote from home. And I just think we're really changing the landscapes of how that works. And the way I would love to just like go through the timeline, and both of you can interject. You said you've done dual interviews before. I haven't. This is a new thing. I don't think Ryan has either. And you guys can kind of talk about where you were at as we go through these timelines. But I would love to just know how in the hell you got to start at South Park Studios, because that, especially on season 12, like they were well into it. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And I've been a South Park fan. Ryan's been a South Park fan for years. I mean, Jessica, I'm sure you've been a South Park fan. I mean, it's wild, right? So it's just like, how did you get a start at South Park? And then while we go through these timelines, I want to know what Jessica was doing as well, because we're talking to both of you guys, so we can both. I want to know, especially when we get to Disney, because that fascinates me. That used to be like my dream job when I was a kid.
It was my dream job. Yeah.
So we can go through that timeline kind of organically and and figure it out. So like, how did you end up getting a start per se at South Park?
Yeah.
That has a bit of a funny. I had mentioned to you before the interview that South Park has a wealth of interesting stories that come from that place, from the people that work there.
Any of them, man.
And really, there's almost no aspect of production that isn't a little strange at South Park, and including the process of how they hire people. And I don't know if they do this so much anymore, but this used to be the way they did it, and they were sort of infamous for this. I like to say that I almost accidentally got the job at South Park, because it was a thing where there's a website called Creative Heads that is still active, actually, where people who work in animation and whatnot can go on there, and it's like a big job board. And I had like a profile on there. And one day I was just clicking through Creative Heads, and I saw it was like South Park is looking for artists. And I was like, interesting. I wonder what is required of that. And so I clicked on it just to see what the requirements were.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that by clicking on it to read more, I applied to the job.
They lure you in. That's hilarious.
Yeah, it automatically sent my information to them. And so I just sort of read through the requirements, and I'm like, that's really interesting, huh? And especially because another friend of mine had already worked there. And so I was like, oh, interesting. Like, we both went to school.
Where is South Park Studios based out of?
They're in Marina Del Rey, California.
And
so that's like just around Culver City. It's sort of like on the west side.
The Burbs. Yeah. I know that area very well. Yeah.
And they're in this big blue building that's right by the ocean there, actually. It's
a very pretty area.
Yeah, it's a nice
Culver City's up and coming too. But anyway, that's not I'm not going to gloat about California driving.
So I got a call from Daryl Sankton, who's the line producer there, and she said, "Hey, would you be interested in coming in for an interview?" And I went in, and in the interview, they do they actually give you like a little test, basically using their software. And I failed the test. And so I was like, well, that's the end of that. And I just went home. And then they called me another week later and they were like, well, we would love for you to come in and be part of our trial period. They do, and this is the unique part, which is they do this thing that's like, it's like a Survivor or something, where they, because the schedule at South Park is extremely rigorous and it's very, very time based. Like you have to be able to perform super fast.
Isn't it called like 6 days to air or something of that nature? And I want to get into that too. Like I really want to know like, how accurate all that is and how that works. But
absolutely. And so what they do is there's one position. They have one position available, and they hire 3 people for the trial period, and they pay you like an employee during those 2 weeks, but they put you through a series of tests. And they give you all sorts of like assignments that you would get as if you were on the show, and they're basically timing you to see like how fast do all 3 of you do it, how accurate do you do it, how clean. They pull you into sort of mini interviews and ask you specific questions. They even test your knowledge of the show, because knowing the show helps be able to do the show faster, because you can pull references or assets or anything from any of the other episodes. There's a lot of reuse. So
that's efficient as hell. I just wonder, like, it's crazy like how crunched that is. And like, I'm surprised they haven't made that a show in of itself. I know they like capitalize on the documentary opportunity to like, they have arguably the most unique production turnaround in the business right now. I think.
It's funny, like, so Frank Agoni, who's the executive producer, when I went in for my, after I won, I ended up winning that little contest. And after I got the job, I had a little mini meeting with Frank, and he, I think, said it best. He said, we are the only animation studio in the world that operates like Saturday Night Live, basically, where we put together a show in about 5 days, and then the full production thing is a 6-day schedule. And he says, where we come up with the episode, we create it, we put it on the air within a week. It's the closest thing to an SNL production.
It is, but I even think it exceeds in a way, because the fact that you still have to render animation and have it, and it does look good. Like that's what's crazy to me, is like, even when it didn't quote unquote look good in the first 2 seasons, it's still charming, and I loved the way it looked. So it's funny that South Park has like this model that can get away with being so incredibly fast. And I mean, when you were doing this, did you ever have a moment where you're like, I don't know if I want to do this full time, or were you just so to be able to do this for South Park? Were you in the moment? Because for me, I'd almost be like, do I really want to commit to a full-time 6 days to air type timeline?
Yeah. It's a very unique schedule.
Yeah. For me, so when I got that job, I was 25, and I was fresh out of grad school. And so for me, it was a 2-part thing. And on one side, I was really, really excited to just be in broadcast. Like it was my first job doing anything that was in the broadcast realm. And so I was like extremely excited, and I was like, yeah, this is great. And I sort of really was hungry to do that schedule. I thought that I was the uniqueness of that schedule and the show made me more excited to work on the show. I was like, oh my gosh, we're really going to do that. And I wanted to see something that ridiculous in person. And it's funny though, because I would ask people some people had worked there for like 10 years at that point. And I would ask them, I was like, wow, like, how do you feel about this schedule? You know? I said, like, I can't believe you've been doing this 10 years and you're not sick of it. And from their perspective, they were like, oh, I prefer it. They said, I like that when I'm working at South Park, that's my whole life. And then when I'm done, I can not work at all. And they go on hiatus basically. And people who come back year after year, they're paid like a retainer fee, like a small retainer fee to stay on basically.
It's like a teacher. It's like how they do it in education in a way with the summer breaks, but a lot larger. Because you guys they air in the fall, right? Like that's when they air. So it's like so I guess production is throughout. They do it throughout that season and they air it. I just think it's fascinating that we don't know more about what made them start that. I mean, have they always done that? Is it always?
I have the answer.
Yeah.
The show used to be done. They used to do it about 2 weeks per episode. Was how they used to do it.
Still really fast.
Really fast. Still way faster than any other animated show.
Yeah.
And then it just became a thing where it just shaved down further and further the longer they worked out. And it very quickly got to that time. I think it only took about 3 seasons for them to hone in on, because it was a thing where like, oh, well, maybe we can do an episode in 10 days. And then they're like, well, maybe we can do it in 9 days and do it in 8 days. And then eventually they hit 6 days, and they were like, "That's the limit. That's the
has to be the ceiling." Yeah, exactly.
Eric Stau, who's one of the producers, who, side note, he's who Butters is based on the show.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
That's
his personality.
So Eric Butters' actual name in the real show is Eric Stotch, and it's like butterscotch, like butterscotch, and so Stotch is based on Stow. And when Matt and Trey and Eric all went to college together.
Like Eric's the voice of Butters as well, isn't he?
No, Matt is the voice of Butters, but he used to call, and Eric, when he was in college with them, behaved exactly like Butters, basically like a super duper positive, really, really like fun-loving, happy guy. Super duper wholesome. And Trey used to call him Butters, like Budders, like buddy. Like he's like, oh, he's my buddy. He's my Butters, you know? Yeah. And so
they have such an enigma of a personality to me. I mean, it's just insane how much they can ooze onto their product and still manage to do, because I think the most crazy, mind-boggling thing to me is that they still managed to do this in 6 days. I know we're like beating the dead horse with it, but it's like I look at a lot of animation now, at least on the television cycle, that I really appreciate and like resonate with, and they take months, like as it should. Like it's such a difficult craft. Like I love watching like Adventure Time and like Steven and even Rick and Morty, even though I know that's like made, but like they take years to really put in the ideas for Adventure Time or Steven Universe or whatever it is. And it's like the fact that they're able to have so much nuance and such relevant jokes within 6 days and still have it look good, I mean, and like when it comes to this, you get the job. Like, what is your official title when you join on? What do they give you? Like, how does it work? What are the responses? You told me this before the interview, but I would love to hear you talk about the different things you're doing.
Well, just to finish that thought earlier, and to what you were saying about how crazy it is that we do it in 6 days. Eric Stau, I think, put it really well one time when he said every week it's like we're working on Trey's short film. It's how it feels. It's that same sensation of like, or I mean like student film, where it's like that rigorous, oh my God, we're barely going to make it in time schedule. And and so I thought
actually like how a student film is, and maybe that's why it's managed to maintain so much authenticity throughout 20 plus seasons, because a lot of the times there's burnout. I think you go through many teams after about 4 to 6 seasons of a show. I mean, people usually just don't stay that long because of I think creativity really is a spectrum where you just got to let yourself peak and trough, and to be able to have this authenticity for so long is really just, you can't understate it.
They've commented before, they being Matt and Trey, about how they say that it, for better or for worse, it's the panic that brings them the good ideas. I guess I have a few things I could talk about in that world, but
you go ahead and lead this dance, whatever you want to talk about.
But I'll say, so my role when I was there, so they basically have just 2 sets of people that are on the floor. Well, they have the story team, which is its own. They have the writing team, and then they have the storyboard team, which is about 6 people or so in a room that are just cranking out storyboards for Matt and Trey to look at in editorial. Yeah. And then the rest of us they basically have what I call, they have the animators that are animating, and then they have they call them technical directors, but I call them everything that isn't animation.
So chief everything officer, pretty much.
Yeah. And so that was what I was hired for. They called them the technical directors. We used to joke, we technically direct our hands to the mice, because that was the only, that's the only way that phrase makes sense.
Because that's what I was wondering when you told me technical director, and I'm not overly familiar with how animation is done as much. So I was just wondering what you explained it as like backgrounds and rigging and things like that. Is it anything on the back end of production? Like, is that what a technical director is?
A real technical director, what they would really do is they would handle all of the technical aspects of a production pipeline. And that's everything from writing software to solving problems that come up in the pipeline, to setting up just the tools for the animators and the artists to use. That's what TDs really do. At South Park, like you just mentioned, they do everything. And in fact, the thing we do the least is write code. They actually tell us don't do that, because the schedule is so fast and the pipeline is so fragile in that way, that they say, like, if you write any more software, that's almost grounds for being terminated, because they don't want you to mess with any of the tools at all. Anything that could pick up the production would be bad.
And that makes sense. I mean, you guys have managed to get it down to 6. It's like, why would we want to add anything on that back end? They can complicate it.
So the TDs at South Park, they were the first line that is after story. Story department also designs the main characters that are going to be used in every episode that's custom. And they also design any backgrounds that need to be made. And then the technical directors, they translate those into South Park assets. So we take all those drawings that they did and then we turn it into the final things that you'll see on the screen. Yeah. And then we create the characters, we rig those characters, then we hand those off to animation. We also set up the shots. So we also do what's called layout in a traditional television pipeline. And then, so by the time the animators get it, they can just open up the shot, all the characters are in there, backgrounds are ready, and they just slam through the animation.
That's amazing. When it comes to what you guys are doing, it's like, it's an interesting process in terms of creative input. And you told me you got to work on it must have been surreal, some of the stuff you have to animate. So like, I'll come at it from like a fan standpoint. Like, sure. I'm about 25 years old. I've been growing up on South Park since I can remember. Season 12 is one of my favorite seasons. It has some of my favorite episodes, right? So the China Problem is one of my,
yes.
one of my favorite episodes of all time, when they go on the P.F. Chang's.
Yes.
And
there's also some big raping that happens.
Butters keeps shooting people in the dick. So like, you animated Butters shooting people in their genitalia. Like, is that what you're telling me right now? Like, that's the first season. Like,
it's funny, that episode is split into 2 halves. There's the P.F. Chang's plot, and then the other plot is George Lucas and Steven Spielberg raping Indiana Jones.
Oh my God, you're right. Oh my God, you're right.
So I was on the raping story, not the dick shooting story.
But that thing is, I forgot those were the same episode, and I am constantly, I don't know if you're aware, like, so a couple of days ago, Disney had their investor meeting. I know you're probably aware because you work there. And they talked about how a new Indiana Jones movie's coming out, and it looks promising because they have a great director in charge of it. My brother and I are the biggest Indiana Jones nerds of all time.
Awesome.
Every day before we would fall asleep, we'd have the VHS growing up. We'd watch it every night. And Griffin sends me this text, my brother, when they announced a new movie, and it was literally a gif of like George Lucas thrusting into Harrison Ford, and he's like, they're gonna fuck Indiana, and I'm just like, that's
stop, he's already dead.
Yeah. And by the way, real quick, guys, just an update. This meeting might end in like 10 minutes, and I'll start a new chat room, and we'll do it.
Okay.
So, just because I don't have the paid for Zoom, because
I see it. Yeah.
See the remaining time.
So when we get down to
the 2-minute
warning, we'll do a 2-minute warning and stuff like that. But you got to talk me through that. I know, again, Jessica, we're going to dive in deep with Disney, and I want to know how much time you have too. So how much time do we have left to talk to you guys in total? Right now?
Probably like an hour or so, right?
An hour, okay. So I just want to be able to gauge it, because I want to make sure I get into like the later ends of your guys' career with New York and everything of that nature, and then how you guys met at Sony. But again, I just am such an uber South Park fan too, so like I want to get into this. And anything we don't cover, we can always do it again because we're all at home. Zoom Nation right now. But yeah, walk me through what it was like to not only pass that rigorous series of tests, and then you find yourself, I mean, that's crazy to me. I mean, what are some of your like biggest memories from season 12 and like animating that? Because that's a standout to me, is all that kind of shit. That episode is one of the most important episodes to me. So it's funny.
The one of the fun things about being on the artist side of, and like I guess what I mean by that is the non-writing side of working at South Park, is that it's just as much of a surprise for us as it is for everybody who's going to watch the episode.
That's awesome.
And we don't know what we're going to be making episodes about until the week of. And there's a couple episodes that are already kind of ready. Like the Matt and Trey and the whole writing team have a writer's retreat that they do. And they usually come out of that with a sort of a bundle of ideas that are a little bit uncooked, you know? Yeah. And we have our big, like let's get fired up meeting that happens right before we start the season. And we have about 4 weeks of ramp up before episodes start going on the air. And we usually use those 4 weeks to get a head start on the episodes that we know are going to be really hard to do.
And explain what you mean by that in terms of hard to do. South Park is such a groundbreaking show in terms of controversy or production time. So when you say hard to do you mean like actually the time on the pipeline?
Yes, exactly. It's episodes that are going to require, just from an asset standpoint, way more work than a regular episode. And there's usually one of those per season, and it's usually episode 4. And
why episode 4?
I don't know. It just works out that way.
So random.
It's a thing where usually, because depending on the size of the episode, they usually need just a couple more weeks even after airing has started to fine tune that episode. And
so was the episode, wait, so when you did season 12, was it the breast cancer show ever? Was it that?
The two, me and this guy, Dan Patow, who still works there, by the way, we used to call them episodes. And we were like, what's the episode? And so in season 12, there's 2 of them, because I don't know if you remember this, but back when season 12 was on the air, all of television at that moment in time was doing a thing where they were splitting their seasons in 2.
Yeah.
Like that was a very common thing. It was like, and then they would have like, here's the mid-season finale of Lost or Heroes or whatever else was on TV. That was
huge back then. I don't know why. That's just the standard.
And now they've done the thing where they've recombined them. But so we had 2 like episodes, you might say. And our first one that we did that was giant was Canada on Strike.
Canada on Strike, of course.
That was super big. And that was the thing where it's like, okay, well, we have to create a ton of like Canadian stuff. We had to make the hardest thing to do, honestly, was I was on the team that was making all of the like displaced Canadians that were sort of becoming sick and dying and whatnot. And so that was an instance where actually I did have to write a script for myself to manage the beards on the Canadians.
No way. Well, that's what I mean by creative freedom. You guys do really have to, like, it's such a, and they give you that freedom. Like you have to check in with people when you have to do that. Like
it's most of the time. Well, and again, like you should never ever write custom code at South Park, but this was a case where I was just like, there's no way I'm going to get all these Canadian faces done unless I come up with a tool that can help me. And that was fun, actually, because as technical directors, sometimes you get to sneak your friends and family into episodes as characters. And it's usually when they're just like, we need you to make like 6 more townspeople, you know? And for the Canadian episode, even though they all just look like Terrence and Phillips, like the flapping heads.
He's got the hat in his mouth,
Yeah, I made a couple friends of mine into Canadians for that episode and dressed them like how they normally dress and whatnot. But so that was a big one we had to prepare for. And then the other one was, I'm trying to think if that was in the second half, but it was this episode called, hold on just one second. Yeah, it was Major Boobage. And that's
my God, yeah.
That's the one where it's like, what's
cats are illegal because they were getting high on the cat urine.
Yeah, it's the cheesing episode. The kids call it cheesing. Yeah. And what's the heavy metal?
That's like,
heavy
metal
is
the heavy metal episode, right?
Yeah.
Crazy heavy metal hallucinations.
Yeah.
That is such a wild episode.
This is nuts. That was a nuts episode, and that, just a slight behind the scenes. You can look this up online, but like a slight behind the scenes on that would be Matt and Trey really, really wanted to make it look like heavy metal. And they were like, is there any way we can use our existing pipeline to do that? And they tried very hard to find like a shortcut way to do it. And in the end, they said, no, the only way we can achieve that weird look is to do it the way they did it, which is to hire 2D traditional animators to animate it like you would animate a regular hand animated movie. And they hired a bunch of people from Warner Brothers, I believe. And we set up like a second animation studio inside the office where those guys were just working on Cintiq, like draw on monitors, round the clock basically, and trying to blast that episode out. So that's why they pushed that one to episode 4. So like, there's no way we're going to make that for the premiere. So
that's wild. I just no, go ahead.
Oh, but just in terms of like, just to get back to the big, like fired up meeting that we have at the beginning of the season, that's where they announce, I guess that's where I was going with like the whole writer's retreat thing. It's like Frank, the executive producer, comes on and we all get together in this big foyer and he's like, okay guys, like today marks the first day of the run. And he goes, we're going to give you a little bit of an idea of what's coming up to get you guys excited. He goes, this season we're going to be doing an episode where it's based on heavy metal. He says that's going to be interesting. He's like, and we're also going to do a rape episode. And everybody was like, what? And he's like, yeah. He goes, we're going to be doing some parodies of some very famous rape scenes from movies. So get prepared for that. And I remember when they said that, and my first thought when they said that was like, oh my God, I wonder if we're going to do The Accused. It has Jodie Foster in it. And
my first thought would be Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, and we did, but it didn't make it into the final episode.
Okay, Singing in the Rain to me is the most famous rape scene. It's the most famous rape movie.
Yeah, I worked on that. I worked
on
a weird
list that exists, but like
the Singing in the Rain. We created those characters and everything. We animated that whole scene, but we didn't put it in.
And what, with Indiana Jones? Like, you guys were doing it with Indiana Jones?
Yeah, and he's all tied up. He's,
Did it just come down to Comedy Central going?
I think it was a time thing. We did 4 rape scenes and we had to cut one.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Jessica brings up a good point of like how often Comedy Central is like, fuck no, like you can't do like, at that point you're 12 years into them just like getting away with so much, and they put Comedy Central on the map. So in a way, it's kind of like how LeBron isn't owned by the Lakers. He kind of owns the Lakers. It's like South Park kind of owns Comedy Central with their creative control, in the way of which like they literally they gave them a bankroll. How long did you stay at South Park though? Like, I mean, you join on and you have this bombastic season, and that must have been insane. And I think you call that your career start, right?
Yeah.
Like, how long did you stay there?
Yeah. So, and the funny thing is, so this brings it all the way back to something that I started to say earlier and I forgot to finish, which was, because you were asking about like a little while ago, you were saying like, oh, how did it feel when you started? Like, were you excited to jump into that world, or were you kind of loathing it? And really, like on one hand, as a youngin back then, it's your age, I was just so excited to be part of the show, and frankly was like, wow, I've always loved South Park. I can't believe I get to be a part of that now. And but on the other hand, I knew from the get-go, I really, really just wanted to work in feature animation. And
why specifically feature animation, for me who doesn't know much about the differentiators?
Well, my sort of career goal was to become a feature character animator. And I love character animation, and I wanted to be working in a space that really would really allow for really nuanced performance in animation. And feature is one of those realms where they give you enough time, for the most part, to do that, to craft a really nice, nuanced performance. Where TV,
like the opposite in terms of timeline.
Yeah, and TV's a little bit more of a rush schedule, and so you have a little less time to create more specific performances in that way. Also, I just wanted the challenge of it. I was like, oh, feature animation is so difficult. I kind of want to do it just to like, it's like becoming a good musician. You know what I mean? Like you want to be a part of a group that gives you the opportunity to both learn from, and that's a big part of it. Even for me now today, one of the things I value the most about working in feature animation is the education part of it, where you get to learn from people who are way better than you for the most part, how to do your craft.
It seems to be a consensus when I talk to people who've done feature animation, because a question, I didn't prepare many questions for you because I just wanted it to be organic. But something I truly did want to know for both of you is who your animation like influencers were. Like when you grew up watching something, I'm such a nostalgic person. I grew up on animation, and there's some animators who have literally changed my life, and no one really even knows their names. I'm just like, who are those people for you? Like where you're like, I want to do what they did. Like I've spent hours in the DVD behind the scenes features watching how to animate, and now I want to do that very thing. Like for me, that would be, obviously like you have Hayao Miyazaki and people like that, but then you have things over in Europe and in Russia and Israel, especially. Their animation with cell shading is incredible. I just want to know what that is for you. So,
do you want to take this one
Sure.
first?
Yeah. For me, growing up, I mean, obviously, like everybody, like most animators, you're raised on a buffet of Disney films, and so those, of course, are a major influence. I always say that when people ask me what made me want to get into animation, I usually pinpoint for me. I think that I saw The Lion King in theaters as a kid.
Wow.
And
the best year to see movies in theaters, arguably, ever in our generation.
Yeah.
1994.
Yeah. I saw that film. I would have been 11, I guess, when that film came out. And I remember when they got to the elephant graveyard scene. That scene to me, and I had a gigantic theater in my town growing up. It was a converted opera house, so the screen is massive. And looking up at that thing and seeing it, I was just like, what? That communicated to me that animation, the world of animation, was as theatrical, if not more theatrical, than any great film that I had seen at that age. And that scene, I was just like, holy cow, it feels so big, feels so epic. And
The Lion King definitely defined to me what scale can look like, because so much of it is landscape.
Yeah.
And Disney movies usually don't have a lot of ma in their film, where we take the time to slow down. Whereas The Lion King did, like, so much of their runtime was dedicated to showing you what you're about to be, the landscape you're living in. And that's insane.
It takes the time to set the tone and the mood. And there's so many great, beautiful establishing shots that are like, oh yeah, well, here's the Serengeti and whatnot. And the scene where it starts raining over the fields is super awesome to me still. And it's just a moment that they take out of the film to, again, establish mood and tone without any characters talking.
That movie different from a lot of Disney films, in my opinion. That's the first movie I've ever watched in my life. I was born in 95. So when I was a baby, my parents, used to just they just put me in front of the Lion King to get me to stop crying. So I grew up watching, that is like the defining childhood movie for me. I grew up on Disney as well. So I definitely resonate with what you're saying there. It's interesting. And then
my babysitter that was how I learned about Disney films, is she used to bring over what was on VHS at that time, which was The Great Mouse Detective and the Robin Hood and Cinderella and stuff like that. And so I think that's also why The Lion King was so incredibly epic to me, was because my experience watching Disney films up to that moment was on the small screen.
Yeah, and that's true.
And it just seemed a little smaller, and also the scale of the music and the sound and everything.
Well, they did, and it's interesting to me too, because they had a lot of I think the reason we saw a change in formula with them is because Disney didn't have their eye on that project. In 1992 and 1993, they're like, Pocahontas is going to be our moneymaker, and they put their A team on Pocahontas. I'm sure everyone in this conversation knows that. And we can, look what a B Team can give you, one of the best animated films of all time. With Hans Zimmer and Elton John at the helm of the score that you're talking about, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
But that decade in general was crazy for animation. I mean, when we look at the 90s, if you're a kid in the 90s, when we transitioned into Pixar animation, Hayao Miyazaki made a return with Princess Mononoke, and like that, to me, that's like the craziest animation I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I have recently, I grew up just like you, David. Like, I grew up on Disney films, animation, and then Brad Bird. So like Iron Giant and then anything Disney was my love.
Yeah.
And then I guess recently I did fall in love with Sony because Spider-Verse literally is like one of the craziest movies I've ever seen in my life. But I just discovered Miyazaki within like the last 2 months. I never saw a Miyazaki film. And
got a lot of great stuff to watch.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. Like just this year?
Just this year. And I never saw anything. I never saw Spirited Away. I never saw anything. And I watched Spirited Away a few times. I watched it once and was like, this is wild. And then I took mushrooms and watched it again. I was like, this is
it's like discovering Hitchcock,
Yeah.
And again, I'm not even someone who's super big on like doing psychedelics all the time. And I'm like, I just want to like appreciate everything about this guy's. I've never met such a master of his. I've never seen such a master of their craft before while watching these films. I just now finished my marathon. I finally caught up. So I've seen all the Miyazaki films plus Grave of the Fireflies, which were my heart.
Wow. Oh no!
So what about you, Jessica? What made you want to be an animator? I mean, I know you started off in like Canadian TV animation, which is super fascinating because Canadian TV is slept on, man. People give Canadian TV too much shit. I grew up watching so much Canadian TV, especially like Trailer Park Boys and Nirvana, the band, the show, which is one of my favorite things in the world.
So good.
So anyway,
I mean, they had the first 3D animated television show with Reboot. That even like Jimmy Neutron was the first 3D cartoon for Nickelodeon, but Reboot was the first 3D animated television show in America.
In the world,
really?
In the world?
Yeah. Was it in the world? Because I'm gonna say, I think, and this would have been around what, like 99, 2000.
Gosh, no, I should just check at the DVD. I'm staring at it right now. It goes way back.
I think it was circa 1995 or 6.
Yeah. That's crazy. So that's wild. Yeah, because Neutron didn't get their run until December 2000 on Nickelodeon. That's only because the movie had the profit, and it was such a risky thing for them to do at the time. I think it's nuts that people would invest in that on TV.
It's a long time ago. Because and to give you an idea, technically speaking, Reboot, the series, predates Toy Story 1. So I think the first episode first season aired in 1994 because there was Pixar animators that were hired from Mainframe. Mainframe's the company that made Reboot. That were hired from Mainframe just because they had experience doing 3D animation. It was so new.
It was so much, I would almost call animators in the mid to late 90s engineers. I mean, animators are always engineers, right? Like, you've talked a lot about code so far, David, and like I think animation is literally giving life to something. It's problem solving, but like in the 90s, it's crazy because it really was engineering a new technique, and we're still seeing that because we're at the birth of this new era of animation. But so I want to put a pin in after I hear what Jessica talks about. I want to know like your guys' thoughts on the difference between working on 2D and like a 3D kind of process, because I have my thoughts on both of them.
Sure.
With appreciation as a fan. I've never animated anything, but but like Jessica, your eyes widened when I mentioned Hayao Miyazaki. Was he an influence on you?
He was a big influence for me. A lot of my inspiration was drawn. I grew up watching Sailor Moon. I grew up watching Dragon Ball Z. That was kind of the cartoons that would come that I loved in late night TV in Canada. And I always thought, I'm going to go to Japan and I'm going to be a Japanese animator. I'm really glad I didn't do that. I'm really glad I didn't have the talent to do that. Because and it's coming to the forefront now, to go off on a small tangent, but the amount of work that you have to put in when you come right out of school, Dave going to South Park, me starting in TV, the first few years of your life often are non-existent. And that often doesn't change in Japan. Their work ethic is amazing, but the amount of work that you're expected to do is insane.
They don't really have the ladder comfortability system. People climb the ladder in Japan, but they don't gain comfort and leisure and leeway as they do it. I know I have a friend who went and animated in Japan, and he said, and he did it for 2 years, and he said it was just like doing boot camp every day. And he said it was like, it was creatively fun, but it felt way too much like a job. Whereas so many animators I know feel like they're doing a grind, but they also have the feel of their passion to keep them going in that crunch time. So I think that's interesting that you say that you did kind of dodge a bullet in a way of not wanting to pursue that.
Oh, for many reasons. One, I can't draw as well as I'd like as many 2D animators, but the work ethic is amazing. But I'm glad that I pursued 3D over 2D in the end. But still, most of my inspiration came from 2D animated movies, specifically anime and the manga style, because they did what many American studios are doing now. They touched on very dark emotions and very sad emotions. They would have longer pauses, and some of the animation is just incredible, like in Hayao Miyazaki, where you have those pauses. And a little bit they cover it in Bambi when his mother dies and there's a moment of silence, and even in Inside Out when Joy is holding onto the balls and talking about the girl as though she were her own child. And I was like, what a wonderful
I think
moment.
Pixar is a differentiator. I think Pixar really in their first decade run reminded me a lot of Ghibli. Now that I have seen Ghibli, you should see my hypocrisy on Twitter where I've talked about how much I praise Pixar, and then within 2 weeks I'm like, nothing, and this is a controversial statement because I love controversial statements, right? I was just like, I haven't seen Disney do anything that Ghibli has done from a filmic standpoint in my entire life. And again, that's not true. But it was more the fact that I'm like, I've never seen these complicated all age stories be told also while beautifully animated. I just haven't seen that. But at the same time, it's like, I'm fully aware of Sleeping Beauty and Snow White, and there's certain things that are just like, they blow me away at Disney, and they still do. Yeah. I just have I'm on the hype train with Japanese animation. Like for you, what films stood out though? Like with David's being Lion King, what would be yours?
I do love The Iron Giant, but for anime, it was Kiki's Delivery Service.
That's my favorite film ever.
Oh yeah, I get quite emotional when I watch any kind of animated film, or any film for that matter. But it was really Kiki's Delivery Service, and I thought it was fascinating and cool. I mean, my favorite Miyazaki film is The Castle of Cagliostro, but for Kiki,
I haven't seen that.
Oh, it's good.
It's not on HBO. It's not on HBO, and I didn't want to pirate it. I wanted to find it, and
I don't know if it's still on Netflix. But
it was on Netflix for a minute.
Yeah.
And isn't it a part of a larger series? It's his first feature film. So that's why I love that you mentioned Kiki's Delivery Service, because it was the last one I watched in my marathon, because no one was recommending it. Everyone, go to Spirited Away, then go to Mononoke, and then I watched Howl's Moving Castle, Totoro, Nausicaa, Ponyo. And when I got to Kiki's, it was hands down my favorite because of how much it resonated with me from a story standpoint, how metaphorical it is from, if you appreciate animation already or filmmaking in general, you understand creative burnout and pursuit of passion. And I think that's probably why you love it so much. You talked in the beginning of this conversation about wanting to go where your passion is and follow a path of fulfillment. And that's literally the whole theme of Kiki's Delivery Service, is her trying to judge whether or not she should stick with a passion or some bullshit minutia 9-to-5 job. And I think that's an amazing theme.
And you can burn out, and especially in our industry, it's something that is to be expected, sadly.
Yeah.
But there are ways you can pull yourself out of it. There is always a light at the end of the tunnel, and a lot of that comes from your peers. I mean, you kind of asked earlier who we draw our inspiration from. Of course, there are some very famous animators in the industry, but I most draw my inspiration from my coworkers.
I love hearing that.
Yeah, it's really for many different reasons. When I was a lead, there would be two other leads that would sit next to me, and I would draw inspiration on how they react to a problem. As someone who had never been a lead before, I didn't always know how to approach certain problems to give a meaningful solution to my team or to other animators.
When you say you mean lead animator on the team of like how many animators would be under you as a lead? Because I think some people might not know what a lead animator is.
And a lead animator can be very different depending on the studio as well. But where I was, it was a television studio called Bardell in Canada. Yeah. And my team was usually, I want to say 5 to 7 people. I know in film, the teams can be very big. And
this was still 3D. This was still 3D with 5 to 7. That's insane. 5 to 7 with 3D animation.
But that's even a small number. Mm-hmm. And a lot of, depending on where you are, yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah. A lead can be just time management. How you can get in television an episode done. And some animators are quicker than other animators, but some animators' quality is better, and you have to know your team. So I would look to my other leads, and they would always be calm. They would always be so positive, and that gave me such strength. And then working in film, seeing animators who are so good, and it makes you excited to animate. It's like when you see a film that makes you excited. Spider-Verse made so many people, and
that's a mainstream example. It's crazy because like that year was insane for animation, 2018. Like for me, Spider-Verse is like I mean, again, like it's literally the background on my phone, but like I mean, Isle of Dogs came out that same year, and like I just think that. For me, I think people who don't draw, don't paint, don't give a shit about film, don't even watch. I know some people, and I hate these kind of people, but I have some friends like this, who will be like, I just can't get into animated films or animated, I just don't resonate with them. And I'm just almost shocked by that because for me, I resonate 10 to 1 with things that are animated because it's imagination. I'm not constrained by the realism. I think when you are able to, I think it's universal in the experience of appreciating nuance and effort in animation because it's unlike anything. Because animation is literally to give life to something. We are not acting, we are not blocking, we are not set designing or dressing. We are creating from our heads, and we have to fulfill someone's vision while also having our own identity on the page. And I think there's something about that that's so fascinating to me. And like, do you guys feel like throughout your careers, you've always managed to be able to have that kind of passion exist with what you're doing? Because you haven't directed your own film yet. So it's like you've worked for other studios. I mean, I know David, you've gone from like Sony and Blue Sky, and I know you've been at Sony, Jessica, and I just think like how is creative control? Because to me as an artist, creative control is very important. It really is. So how do you feel like that's come and go as far as trade-offs?
I'll let you take this one.
A loaded question. We're doing loaded questions.
Yeah, no, not at all.
I think that as far as how much personal creative input do animators have, both in television and in film, I think in film there's probably, as far as animation goes, there's probably a little more room for that. And I'm sure this applies to almost every creative discipline, is that there is great personal creativity to be found within constraints. And what we mean by that specifically, or at least what I mean by that is, when you're an animator in feature film, you are sort of, you're the actors, basically. You're the puppeteers.
Yeah, truly.
And you're following a script and like a storyboard. But in each way, like, and just like an actor on film is, like a live action actor, they are their job is to interpret that moment in the script as clear and as entertaining as they can in service of the story,
given their resources and things of that nature.
And that's what we do. And there's really a tremendous amount of creativity in that, in terms of, like you said earlier, we're also problem solvers, where we have to find what is the most then in animation, since we get to control what the characters look like, we also have to make them as appealing as possible. So we're making them as nice to look at as well.
It's the hardest job ever, because I think a lot of the work that you put in has to go unnoticed. It's almost like editor.
It's absolutely true.
And obviously that's a standard for a lot of people when it comes to the production aspects of filmmaking. But what I mean is, like, you can notice when someone is animated on a rig that's weird and jarring looking. But when someone has nuance and fluidity, it almost just like you don't register it as much, because it's just so natural. And that is so much harder. And I think that's why I appreciate animation so much. And I think it's also fascinating that you say puppeteer, because it's literally kind of like what Jessica is doing right now. On like and I guess like that kind of redefines my interpretation of anime. My definition of animation has changed a lot in the last 3 years, because I try to understand it in deeper levels. Again, I got into more of the Wes Anderson films, a lot of European and Israeli stop motion, and I fully discovered anime in the last couple of years. And I still haven't seen Akira, and Ryan wants to kill me for that, and I need to watch it. But I, like Jessica, like when it comes to animation, I still consider you an animator if you're doing all the things that I understand about your job. Like, I don't know more about what that means. And you currently do that, right? You're currently an Imagineer at Disney, right? No?
As of sadly a month ago, due to all the Disney layoffs with the parks, I was not immune to that. I'm back in feature. It's okay. It's I came into the job through a series of fortunate circumstances, and I left on the most wonderful note, and just through a series of other fortunate circumstances, through an unfortunate circumstance, I got back into feature, which is great. I can stay down here. I'm very happy. But
actually a really optimistic way of looking at it, because it's like truly a good thing. You know, I didn't know that happened to you. I didn't know that you did that.
It's so recent. But I can still speak as an Imagineer, and it was so fun to have that title, because I don't have a degree in engineering, so I wasn't sure if I was allowed to. And I asked, and they went, "Of course, you're an Imagineer. You Imaginate." And I was like, "That's not a word. That's awesome." But
Imaginate isn't a word. Come on, Disney.
I mean, just that's like the kind of job I would want to do every day. I used to really want to do that job, because I grew up being such a nerd on Disney's parks, living so close to them, and I wanted to. Every day, I'm like, I want to design these rides. I want to design these experiences. And I find that.
I didn't think it was a position that existed. I thought I had to be an engineer to become an Imagineer. And that's why when Dave was at South Park, I was still working through university as trying to pursue a degree in engineering. And it just wasn't working out, because I was more artistic than technical. So I then went, to go off on a small tangent, I then went to more specific technical schools for art, and it worked out. So when I was looking, at the time, I was looking to come down to California, because David got a job at DreamWorks. And Dave actually found the job, and he sent it to me. And when I read the description, it said, animating digitally on animatronic figures. And then I read the description again, and I was like, no.
That's so wild. And it's based out of Anaheim then? Like, is that like how
it is based out of Anaheim, but the Imagineering warehouse is right down the street. It's just so Disneyland is there, but all of the Imagineering, when I found out where I worked, I was honestly across the street from David, where I could look and see the building. There's no way.
Disney Imagineering and DreamWorks Animation headquarters, both of them are literally across the street from each other.
They're on the same street.
You can walk one street over, and there it is.
Disney, being Disney, found out DreamWorks had bought up land, and so they bought up all the other land.
Yeah, that could be its own story.
They're in the acquisition business in many ways, not just with companies, but land as well, for sure.
Yeah, and they're in the competitive business. Yeah. Apparently, I didn't know that this was a thing, but apparently somewhere in the, and you'll appreciate this because you sound like you're a very well-read Disney fan. Somewhere in the 80s or 90s, when Disney was getting very, very greedy in terms of like trying to gobble up all the patents and copyrights around the world, they actually tried to copyright and trademark Mouse. like Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, I know.
And they were like, yeah, we want to actually own the word mouse and have that be a property of Walt Disney Company. And the courts fought them on that. And they were like, no, you can't do that. Like,
there was another thing they did during that era where they wanted to also have the term original film copyright.
Yeah.
Within the same decade. They wanted which isn't as serious.
Yeah.
Original movie. Because I think they ended up getting the Disney Channel original movie or something like that. Right. But like, I think it's wild that they wanted like original product, mouse, and there was something else of like, are you guys serious? Like, you really? Yeah. I mean, they shot. I mean, like
they're ambitious.
Yeah.
A lot of companies have tried. Companies I even love have tried to do, like Sony, PlayStation has tried to copyright the word cross and share play and let's play. Which is
they recently, like when Spider-Verse, they tried to trademark onto
Ohio. So we're from Ohio, right? So Ohio State wanted to trademark the word the. Fuck
because the Ohio State
University.
I learned that this year.
They're so far up their own ass. They wanted to trademark.
God bless you.
Sidebar: Go Cincinnati.
Oh yeah. By the way, I hope Cincinnati wins it all this year.
We're talking about Cincinnati right now. So like, wait. Go Cincinnati. That makes me happy. Why do you say that?
Because they're kicking ass. Yeah. Well, because
all of us graduated from University of Cincinnati.
Awesome.
I graduated recently, and Ryan just graduated like 2 days ago.
Congratulations! You made it.
Way to go!
And it's funny, we both started. We both went in there for like business and communications, and then by the end of it, we started taking all these film classes. It was kind of funny how we wedged our way through, kind of like squeezing through a keyhole to kind of take over the film program. Because they didn't have an active film club there. They didn't have a film department that was like running on a student body basis. So we're like, let's make a podcast and use the resources to talk to really cool people and see how we do it. Because like that's what we want to do. He wants to work on the back end with production, editing, management. I want to work on directing, production. I mean, we kind of want to work on the same things when it comes to filmmaking stuff. Eventually, like that's our goal. It's very.
Is that why you're moving down to Austin?
It definitely contributed to it. So something when you talked about you move based on passion, based on cities, based on job. I refuse to. So I graduated in August, and pre-COVID, it was on the up and up. It was like the podcast was taking off, and it wasn't in a stance of viewpoints as much as it was on we were getting connections with people we respect, like you guys. Like I didn't care about clout. I didn't care about popularity or projects or money. I was like, I just want to meet people who have genuine passion and our connections benefit in many ways, business and personal. And it was ever flowing. And then the pandemic slowed that down. And I was like, I'm not going to let it stop. I'm like, let's go to a town where there's kind of a frontier of industry when it comes to entertainment. And Austin is exploding. The house market, the podcast market, it's the live music capital of the world. Comedians are flowing here in groves. In droves, rather. I can't talk. It's just, and Ryan's coming here in about a month. I'm already here on the ground, and we just thought it would be a good start for us to kind of rebrand and start over again, because we only had the podcast from like January 2020 to like March, and in that time we did a lot of traction. And I'm like, let's just do it again. Let's just meet some cool people. Our goal is to be in this industry and talk about this industry and promote the people who deserve to be promoted.
And now you can walk over to Joe Rogan and high five him because he's there now.
He's very active in the city. I mean, I saw him and Bill Burr like last weekend outside in like a field. Like it was really funny. Like we literally were out in the field, socially distanced, and Bill Burr was just like, man, anyone's going to ask you guys if you're a fan of industry or stand-up comedy or whatever. And they're like, did you ever drive in the middle of nowhere, freezing your balls off at like 10 o'clock at night in a field to watch a stand-up show? It's like, and Chappelle apparently was there, but he didn't come on stage. It's just like, this town is definitely, I feel like we're seeing that. And like something I'd love to ask you guys is, being in LA, or at least, in the burbs of LA, COVID has made LA change more than it has in a long time. Because I think the things that have been annoying about LA are finally coming to a bit of fruition. And I'm 50-50 with Los Angeles. Like, I'm not trying to shit on LA. I like a lot of their legacy. And I think there are hidden things about LA that are unlike anywhere else. Truly. The food in Los Angeles and the history of entertainment in the charm of how Los Angeles works. You just you got to really be from there or around there to understand that. But to me, I'm like, I think it's due for a change. Like I think like with what we see with happening in Atlanta, in Toronto, and even now Austin, do you guys notice and feel that change of landscape while being on the ground in LA right now during the COVID pandemic?
I don't notice a change yet. If it will come, I believe it'll be a very slow change. A lot of it, I think, will come with the building of the subway system that they are expanding. It's just
in
such
LA, right now?
They're working on it, but it's such a grand city that it's really hard to change the face of it. Whereas, you know, Austin becoming a more up and coming city of industry for comedians, it has already been established for music.
So, like Austin's so eclectic. That's the other thing. There's no not upper class. There's no like hierarchy in Austin, whereas LA has its hierarchies.
A lot of people would call Austin the Portland of Texas. It's got that same kind of vibe.
I would too. For me, there's a few cities when I moved out of Cincinnati that I was looking at. I was like, without money being a factor, because even though it is, I was like, San Francisco has those kind of vibes, but they're getting very washy with how expensive it is and overcrowded.
Oh, yeah.
Portland, in Denver, Atlanta, and Austin right now have the same kind of influx of housing, of people going there. And I think Austin, what stands out to me is the fact that it embraces how, like, let's shake up the formula a lot. Like, let's just keep breaking the wheel and then rebuilding it, which is really fascinating to me. And that's why I wanted to come here, because if I'm trying to get a start in something in this industry, and I'm not even quite sure what it is yet, because I've done many hats. I've done like the directing and producing and hosting. Like, I'm not quite sure what I want to do yet, but I wanted to be in a city where there was a great amount of potential without oversaturation. This city has a lot of people, but it's still a bit less saturated feeling. Still, like, I'm going to be a bit blunt with questioning here. And like,
sure.
Is there anything with which isn't my style usually, but like, you guys have a portfolio that resonates with me. Like, I say that truly, like, I read where you guys have worked and projects you've worked on, from working at Disney to working on How to Train Your Dragon, which hands down is one of the most underrated and beautiful animated films of the last 10 years, in my opinion. Especially with the way the animation flows with the music, I think is almost Miyazaki. It's like Miyazaki-like. I mean, when you see it, especially with a Nordic influence. I want to just be able to ask you, when you knew you were going to be asked a bunch of questions about your careers, and you have to talk itself, what were some things you were looking forward to talking about? Because for me, I have my angles on like how I resonate and connect with what you talk. And oddly enough, like when David mentioned his passion for cocktails, I'm like, even more so than South Park, I am such a wannabe bartender, dude. Like, I can talk about that all day. So like, what are some things that like you would love to be able to talk about? Like 5 or 6 things that we can just kind of rapid fire it out and edit it in the last 30 minutes or so.
Do you want to?
Well, maybe the first thing I'll say, if you don't mind, is just to sort of launch off of that last thing that you had mentioned about how has LA changed, or have we noticed a difference and whatnot. And really there's, I guess, like 2 things I could say about that personally. Yeah. And this also will bring back something that you had mentioned way earlier in the podcast, which is, so on one hand, there's, I think something that a lot of people don't think about when they think about LA is sort of that on one hand, it's very much a production centric city. It's like a, television and film city, but it also, just as much as that, is just like another American city where people are, living their lives, and it has such a amazing diversity of different neighborhoods within it, that it has its own kind of world of culture that, and Manhattan is another place that sort of is almost the same as that, where,
and I think people almost look at the stereotypes big. I mean, again, I think LA, there are stereotypes that hold true, but like for me, like when I visit LA, the first place I go is Koreatown, and no one even knows about Koreatown. I'm like, I like to go into Koreatown I think it has one of the best art scenes in Los Angeles, and I think the food scene there is incredible, and no one even really knows it exists unless you live in Southern California. So it's like, you know what, I resonate with what you're saying 100%. And same thing with Manhattan. Hell's Kitchen is my go-to in Manhattan, and it's like people don't think about that. So
yep, I have a couple favorite spots in Hell's Kitchen.
And John's on Bleecker is one of mine, I gotta say.
What is it?
John's on Bleecker Street.
Oh yeah.
I've heard of it. Have you been?
We didn't go there though. Yeah,
I went there, and it's pizza. Yep. And I walked up and said, hey, I've never been here. I want to try.
I have been there. I actually have been there.
Yeah, and the guy didn't really speak much English. He's very Italian.
Yeah,
he's Sicilian. We had a bit of a. I'm not Sicilian by first generation, but like my mother's family's Sicilian, so I was trying to shoot the shit with them. And I'm like, I want to get a margarita or a pepperoni. He's like, is it your first time? Like broken English. I'm not even gonna try to impersonate it. I'm like, yeah. He goes, you get cheese. I'm like, okay. And he gives me cheese pizza, and it was the best cheese pizza I've ever had.
Nice. Wow.
I agree with you, dude. So like, I want you guys to take the reins on the next 30 minutes, and like the things that when you knew you were going to be interviewing and talking about I think you guys have truly special and important careers, seriously. And I want to like touch on specific topics that you want to touch on. So like we'll carry on with the LA changing topic, and you were talking about how it's underrated and people sometimes look at it through a microscope. And I agree, because to me, LA is Koreatown. LA is the burbs. LA is almost north, because LA is a weird entity. It's like you could look at LA almost still and being like, well, it could still be Malibu or even like Santa Ynez and Santa Barbara, depending on like how far you want to consider LA, because it's a big ass state. So who knows?
Well, it's funny because my favorite parts of LA are actually a little south of. I love Santa Monica, and I love Venice. But then like Huntington Beach, Redondo Beach, Manhattan Beach, places like that.
Manhattan Beach is it's like the true LA for surfing. It doesn't have the tourism as much, and like kind of like, you know, like North Laguna, like the park area, like the hiking areas of North Laguna is really incredible.
Yeah.
You know? And you guys really haven't seen the change, because I feel like the internet has almost like hyperbolized this LA fallout that's happened during COVID-19. I want to know like how true that is. I haven't been to LA since the pandemic.
I guess I wonder if you could be specific about what are people saying about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost more of a zeitgeist more than individual people's of like, hey, the pandemic has happened and obviously it's affected every single city.
Yeah.
LA specifically, I think California has been under a huge microscope, because a lot of the bullshit has come to fruition of like, we're not doing this anymore because we can't go out, and jobs are tight. We're not going to live in this area that's heavily taxed. And again, I'm as progressive as they come, but even with that being said, there's some things that are complicated and morose when it comes to governing.
I think LA tried to adapt just as much as every other major American city tried to adapt to doing business in the pandemic time. Given their
people don't realize that LA is like, I mean, again, it's big, but like people don't realize how big. It's like downtown LA is not LA. It's literally 30 minutes west to the coast and all the way north, just south of Santa Barbara, down to just north of Laguna. Like LA is huge, and
it's humongous.
I think trying to figure that out is hard. And like the governor of California has a hard job on his hands, because Southern, Mid, and Northern California are very different entities.
It's like trying to govern a country.
I just still think that, so like this is the zeitgeist. Tech is leaving, which is more Silicon Valley, not LA. Like all tech is leaving, coming to Austin.
Yep.
People are done with LA, with California taxes and regulation. They want to get out, and entertainment has gone very digital, and we're going to cities where there's not as much history and taxation, such as we got Toronto, we got even Vancouver, Jessica, and then Atlanta has exploded even more, and now Austin. And I mean, Atlanta and Toronto have been big for the last 10 years already, but I think I don't know. From when I hear people that I know that work in LA, or people who talk about LA, they're like, yeah, we're leaving. Like, we're done. Like, it's already oversaturated. And then COVID was just like, why would we want to stay here? And I'm like, I don't know. I've never lived in LA. I want to know about how, like, what the sentiment is like. And it's probably case by case basis based on your industry. It's fascinating to me.
I think a lot of the people are looking at the bigger picture, seeing what will happen when the pandemic is finished. And what people have been saying for years is that a lot of production can be done digitally, and this pandemic has forced people into that situation. However, once the pandemic is finished, I think quite a few studios encourage people to come back into the office, which is why I think some people have left, maybe permanently, maybe temporarily, but there is still a need for people to be in the office. I do believe that the face of the industry is changing, where there will be more remote work, which is fantastic.
Which is interesting if you don't have to sacrifice creative freedom in that way, you know.
It can be very beneficial for families. Did we lose him, or is he still there?
No, I'm still here.
Sorry.
I spilled candle wax on myself just now, blowing out a candle.
Oh, no.
Cleaning it up.
Yeah.
No, continue your thought, though. Continue your thought.
For people who are young parents, new parents, for people who might need to work from home one day, it's nice to know that that option will probably be more accessible. But even now, months and months later, talking to people, talking to my peers, a lot of them miss the office. They miss that collaboration, whether or not it's just because we can't go outside or that our lifestyle is limited. There is so much creative freedom that you get in our industry, but a lot of that is drawing ideas from your peers. If you have a question, walking 30 seconds to someone's desk and being like, I've got a problem, let's solve it. And a lot of that is done in person. And I think that's still a very important part. Nice sweater. But I think a lot of people would love to live outside of LA or outside a major city for affordability, for many reasons.
I think people it's a weird thing where I almost find, depending on who I talk to, I find myself getting defensive or because I can shit on LA all day, but I'm also like, I understand the things that I like about LA. I'm like, it's just like any other city. I just think that most people don't know the first thing about it. And then they form an opinion on it. You know, like,
it's a hard city to understand.
And I love how one of you brought up the neighborhoods of Los Angeles. And I'm like, it's truly one of those, just like New York, neighborhood-centric places where if I am on Rodeo Drive, or if I am in the inner city of LA, or if I am in Culver City or wherever, it feels like a different part of California. I'm like, it's not the same vibe at all. So I just think that's very bad. I don't think we should be so quick to judge it, but I do notice that it's for the first time, seriously, in a long time, we've seen a major transition from needing LA to exist as a physical entity for the jobs to be done. The jobs to be done that are unique to LA are mostly entertainment industry based. And for the first time ever, and again, to bring up South Park, because they did it miraculously, we can do these things digitally from home. And that goes for every industry. I mean, we've all had to work from home and get familiar with Zoom as we are right now, but I think it's fascinating to see that companies can be like, well, we can go to other places, and not just anywhere, but there's hubs that are forming right now, like Atlanta and Austin. And again, I bring up Toronto because Toronto's been big on my radar for the last 5 years, but I don't know if you guys are noticing any other hot spots where people are emigrating to.
Well,
Montreal mostly.
Montreal,
yeah, that's kind of becoming the new Vancouver in terms of tax breaks, because Vancouver lost a lot of its tax breaks, or they're transitioning out. They're coming to the end of their contract.
Montreal, and I wish we could have continued. It's a damn pandemic, man.
It'll happen.
I think animation is unique to this situation more than live action.
And explain why.
And it's simply because of the digital nature and the virtual nature of animation. Where live action productions, they need people physically to be there in the sound stages shooting this stuff more than, obviously way more than animation. And whereas in animation, just like South Park, it's like, well, the shooting is all being done virtually anyway, so people can be working from anywhere. And so like Jess said, it's one of those things that, like, the industry was sort of on the brink of doing anyway, and this pandemic just pushed it further in that direction in animation.
Mm-hmm.
What have you guys been up to during this pandemic? Like, how do you, I mean, let's clarify real quick, because I think we've talked about your portfolio so deeply and unchronologically.
Mm-hmm.
What are you both doing right now officially, and then like how has it been during this pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for me, it's DreamWorks Animation is one of those studios, just like South Park, that had to very, very quickly try to find a way to transition their whole entire pipeline remote, which was extremely tough for them. They had to just like South Park did like a little making of, and it's when I watched the little making of, I'm like, wow, this is just what we did at DreamWorks, but on a smaller scale.
So it's not that unique to their studio. It's literally everyone.
It was everyone did that. And DreamWorks, they sent everyone home. They very quickly had to find a way to massively widen their bandwidth, connection wise, the studio. They got everybody on a virtual private network to go in, and it's extremely like with DreamWorks, for example, our animation software is proprietary. We don't use off the shelf software. So for us, it was literally us, people, everybody at home with their own little unique setup, setting up a double monitor, ideally set up, where their monitors basically acted as like a window into their desk at the studio. So you would basically, your mouse would just control your mouse at the studio. That way we were remotely controlling our machines. So all of our machines at work were still the machines. Mm-hmm. And then our monitors just became like a live video stream of what we were looking at. So
and like, do you think it should have all, like, what are the things that are positive and negative of this? I mean, we obviously know a big thing about being an artist is being inspired by the people you're working with. I agree with this. I'm not an animator. I'm someone who's produced and directed only. Mm-hmm. And working with people of a multifaceted group of people who can kind of inspire me allows me to be better. I don't know why. Just being around people who just kind of inspire me allows me to think sharper. So do you guys feel like it's been more difficult to be stimulated in a creative sense while being remote and performing your jobs to be done?
It was an adjustment at the beginning, mostly out of adjusting to a new situation, adjusting to the climate of the world, but it was learning to adapt, to reach out to people in different ways instead of just walking over to their desk. Sometimes you would send them a message, but I know a lot of my critiques would evolve into just a video call, and seeing someone's expression, hearing someone's tone of voice and how they're describing something still gave that in-person quality, and that helped keep the animation and keep the creative juices flowing. Whereas if someone were to just type notes, you can't always hear how they will receive it, how they're saying it back to you. So the positive of having Zoom and of being in this age where almost everyone has Wi-Fi or has like a really good bandwidth, and just being able to very easily talk to them through video. I think that's been a really big positive. The pandemic, if it could choose a time to happen, happened at a very good time for animation, I think, because even with Sony, at the office in Canada, we all worked remotely in the studio. And I say that because all of our computers, I believe, are in Washington. So already in Canada, we work through a PCO IP box. And luckily for me, being back at Sony, I have been able to go to their office down here, pick up my equipment, and work as though I were in the Vancouver studio. I was able to set it up. I can work with everyone in Canada from LA. It's workable right now. And that is an incredibly huge positive. I didn't have to move. I didn't have to worry about necessarily where I had to apply, because so many places went remote for the pandemic. And that is a huge positive, I think.
I mean, we understand that for sure. I mean, both of us just graduated college, you know, you have internships and jobs lined up after. I mean, when we kind of launched our creative stuff in early 2020, which is this year, which is crazy.
10,000 years ago in early 2020.
It literally feels like 2 years ago for January.
Yeah.
Ryan feels the same way. Like when we first launched this, it was a bit international. We were going to go over to, you know, Croatia and Prague, and we were going to do San Francisco and Montreal, and like see different studios and kind of see how we can grow. And that fell apart in a weird way. And it was like, all right, so now we have to be completely remote. And like, I think it's almost like figuring out, like, do you want to prioritize the job to be done? Do you want to prioritize money or opportunity? It's just been a weird gray landscape for those who are established and aren't already established. It's been very odd. Where do you guys think it's going to go as far as, because animation, I guess, to your point, could be unaffected, but do you think it's affected the quality of zeitgeist of animation at all with COVID? I mean, with everything having to be remote, because I haven't noticed it. No. I think things that have been directly produced during isolation or quarantine.
Yeah, DreamWorks is fantastic.
It's not just as good or not better than ever, because people are grinding so hard to work.
Yeah. DreamWorks is about to finish its second feature film completely remote, being done remotely.
That's
crazy.
It's wild. Does that make you weary that they might switch to that kind of format rather than have an office space?
A little bit. I think that a lot of people that work there feel that way. They're a little nervous. I know there's like a handful of people that prefer it this way. They like being at home, and they're like a friend of mine who's a story artist there. He's like, if I could just do this forever, this would be great. He prefers just working from his home office. But just like Jess was saying, I think the animators as a whole, because we're such a performance-based part of the production, we thrive off of being in person, and we often act things out to each other in person. And again, just because our job is to be entertainers, a huge thing for me, especially, it's such a specific thing when you show your shot for the first time to the director. You really get a lot of information just watching the director's reaction live.
I can't even imagine how horrifying that must be.
You sit there and you're like, okay, because you're trying to do so much in your first show of your shot. You're trying to solve the story math that's going on in that shot. You're trying to communicate as clearly, and you're trying to be entertaining.
And what's your advice for someone doing that? Like, I think expectations are all, I mean, is your expectation, do you expect to be completely ripped apart when you give that first shot?
I think that really it depends on how you feel personally about the status of your shot when you show it.
Sure, but still, I mean, the first shot with a visionary director, and most of you guys have worked for some pretty visionary directors. So it's like,
I think that I guess my advice would be prepared for anything.
Yeah. Do you remember your first shot?
Yeah. I still remember showing my first shot.
Talk about it.
Well, my first shot as a character animator was on How to Train Your Dragon 2. But I really think of my first shot as a character animator on the Angry Birds movie. That was when, just because that was when I was in control of the whole shot for the first time. And I had a huge amount of respect for the director as well. He was one of my animation heroes. So I was just like, oh my God, what's he gonna, I hope he laughs. Usually, especially if you're working in like a comedy film, you hope that the director laughs at your shot. You hope that it's doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
And really that's the ultimate thing, whether it's funny or supposed to be sad or serious or terrifying. You hope they react the way that they're meant to react.
Getting your ideas conveyed across. I think if I could give any advice to someone who is brand new, either to feature, to game, to television, don't put too much, invest too much emotion into your first shot. My first shot in feature film was on Storks, and it was so simple. It was a very simple shot of a character looking, and I was on that shot for 2 weeks because I couldn't get it, and I was scared, I was sick, and the director, the animation director, and the animation supervisor are some of the most amazing people you'll ever meet. Josh Beveridge and Doug Sweetland. they both worked on. Josh worked on Spider-Verse as the animation.
I know those names. I'm like, how do I know these names?
And Doug Sweetland worked on Presto. With the hat and
the bunny and the magician. He was the director.
Yes, he did.
Very kind, very well receiving, and they were very encouraging. People
too. I mean, that sounds intimidating to me. Those are such well respected people.
And Doug Sweetland is a very, very good animator. Yes. He was an animator at Pixar for years and did some of the most famous shots there as well. So,
and it was an unmemorable shot. No one will remember that shot specifically from the movie, but I could not get it to the way they wanted it. But I thought that was the end of my career. I was like, I'm going back to TV. Maybe someday I can tell my people
have those kind of thoughts. Because it's interesting, because it's like we all fail. Like all of us here are creative. We literally, I feel like we find what we're good at by just consistently failing. If you're creative, at least, because when you're creative, you try everything.
So I want to interject really quick and talk about imposter syndrome, because I graduated with a degree in graphic design, and so it's just there's this constant like, oh, I feel great about what my work is, and then I get these really low lows about like, do I even really want to do this? Like I could just go do marketing or something.
It's true. The only thing I can say to that is learning how to deal with failure comes with experience. And when I first started out, I would burn out. I would get nervous more easily. It still happens, but I'm okay with it now. I'm much better at receiving criticism. I'm okay with knowing if I really don't nail a shot or it's not what the director wanted, I know often I'll still have another opportunity. I'll just have to work that much harder. And it happens. It does. But you learn the tools to how to cope with it. So it's okay if you don't feel like you're supposed to be there. You are. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. And it's hard to accept that when you're new, but the acceptance will come.
I think that's amazing. Do you guys think, where does 2D animation, I had 2 questions left for you guys specifically. Then again, anything you wanted to cover on your own, we can cover. But the 2 questions, to give you a flash forward, we're going to be the place that 2D hand-drawn animation has moving forward in general. And then I wanted to know each of your top 5 animated movies of all time, because and that's and I know that's hard, because we each, if you have a best list and a favorite list, I'm assuming. So like with the former, as we move forward into this new age of animation, starting with the mid 90s and 3D rendering and CG animation, what's the place that 2D animation has? Because for me, and I'll speak as a non-animator first and then get your take, it almost is like, it can be done well, it feels special. Because to a lot of people who aren't as aware of the processes, they look at 2D animation in the modern era as the cop-out or the budgeted version of animating. And I'm like, well, that's not true. It's like they couldn't do computers, so it's the cheap version. I'm like, it's almost harder.
It's like the reverse of that.
Yeah, everything's hand-drawn. It's like, because like the humanity evolves with efficiency. We progress towards making things efficient and technologically shareable and doable in terms of pipeline. But like when we have Miyazaki releasing a film like The Wind Rises still amongst films like Up and Toy Story 3, I'm like, what's the place of 2D animation? Totally opinionated from the 2 of you.
I guess my response to that is 2 parts. And the first part of that would be like, 3D animation, when it got big in the worldwide animation landscape, I think that it started as this is sort of a dirty word, but like it almost started as a stylistic gimmick where it was a new way of doing animation and seeing animation that no one had seen before. When Toy Story came out, it was mind-blowing, because it was just, and that not only is it a fabulous movie, like thank God it's a good movie too, but just from a aesthetic standpoint, people just couldn't believe what they were looking at. It was like, holy cow, what is that?
Truly.
and that hung on for a while. And unfortunately, 2D animation, especially, like, it had reached such a height of technical beauty at that moment in time,
Yeah.
And you still had you had films like Lilo and Stitch coming out, and Tarzan was happening around that time.
In that era, it was literally Princess Mononoke, Aladdin, Lilo and Stitch, Mulan, Pocahontas.
When CG animation was catching on, and when those two things were sort of happening side by side, it is funny to think that like a film like Tarzan was happening around the same time as Ice Age, and it's just sort of like a super sucky collateral damage that Disney feature animation ended up dying because it was a trending thing at that time. That CG animation was just doing better because that's what kids wanted to look at, and it was an aesthetic that had caught on. And unfortunately, at that time, 2D started to look like old animation to kids. And like when kids would look at it, they're like, "Oh no, that's kind of like, that's an era that I'm done with." So I guess that
I think we associate that as like the current generation grew up in the console era of video games, where as things become more 3D and hyper realized, whether they're stylized or not, with the direction of the art, as we become more 3D and more fully realized as far as budget goes, we consider that to be more impressive. Whereas like I'm like, dude, I can look at whether it's gaming or film. I'm like, Undertale is one of the most impressively animated and beautiful games of the last 10 years, and it's sprite animation.
It's like 8-bit looking.
Yeah,
but it's a thing where what?
No, so I said I see what you're saying.
Yeah, it's and now I think now we've moved beyond that, thank goodness, and it's less about that, and it's almost that has now happened to that generation of CG, where it's like that aesthetic where it's like 3D hyperreal looking animation has now become a little passé, and we're now in the era of stylization, and it's 3D kind of trying to imitate 2D, and it's now all blown open. So I think that every sort of medium now has a fair shot at it, and we saw this, like there was like films like Persepolis, for example, that came out around 2010, and that was a 2D animation when it was like spitting in the face of 3D and being like, no, like it doesn't have to always look super duper real, It's funny because that film came out right around the time of How to Train Your Dragon, which that film, How to Train Your Dragon, was trying to look very real, but more in like a Lord of the Rings way than in like a Monsters Incorporated kind of way. And so I think that 2D definitely has a major future. It's Princess and the Frog didn't do too hot, but that doesn't mean that something like that can't happen again.
I think it's because we're taught when we look at games, how right now some of the biggest games out, graphical fidelity isn't as much as important as art direction and nuance and just the design of what we're doing. Like when I think of the games that have impressed me the most with style, to call it vaguely, I think of Hollow Knight. I think of Playdead's Inside, and I think of Cuphead. All of these, and Undertale. These are all sprite games. They're 2D rendered games, and I'm just like, that's fascinating to me. And film will probably get there because the technology had to evolve. And as a bunch of plebs, we think that is when things are more higher quality as they evolve into this 3D space with more advanced render times. But then you look at like something with Miyazaki has not stopped, and many other companies have not stopped with their 2D animation. And I'm like, well, that's going to come back. Like that will never go away. I think it's just like a weird back and forth cycle. As we innovate, we adjust, and then we realize, and then we accumulate everybody. It's rather fascinating. So, I mean, Jessica, are you fully on board with what David just said as far as because I pretty much agree with that.
I think what he said, it really hits it on the head. It's very well said, especially with the emergence of new technologies. 2D has been able to make a comeback in a really big way, especially in television, where you can hit certain qualities that you couldn't hit before without sacrificing a lot of time to get to that quality. But I think it's huge. You can tell great stories through short episodes. I think 2D has a very, very big future still in television, through anime, through American TV,
especially
like Steven Universe.
Steven Universe is so good.
Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty is fantastic.
I think 2D. Well, if you look at the most popular television shows, most of them are 2D animated shows.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Steven Universe, Adventure. I discovered Adventure Time during this pandemic, and I was blown away. Where I love watching an animated show where you could almost tell that the directors or the supervisors wrote on the script go crazy to the animators, because I'm like, how the hell did they manage to put that into their pipeline? Like Adventure Time, especially as a show in the later seasons where you see them just almost trying to outdo themselves with the animation. But I agree with you. I think, and I noticed something Ryan and I both noticed is are you guys gamers? Do you guys game? Because you both your eyes
reacted to Undertale and Hollow Knight.
Well, we mentioned Hollow Knight, and you both just were like, "Yeah." I was like, "Do they play Hollow Knight?" Like we hear, me and Ryan extremely appreciate good art direction in video games. I mean, from all the way back to Wind Waker and Mario Galaxy to now Hollow Knight and Cuphead. It's just like in Playdead's Inside, we really, really appreciate unique art styles in video gaming.
I think it's funny, just by coincidence, this year, David's played Undertale.
We both played Undertale.
Undertale
and Mario Galaxy. So when you hit
Undertale
it, I was like,
is the only video game the Pope has played. So
what was it? Which one?
Undertale?
Matt Pat, who is in charge of the YouTube channel The Game Theorist, visited the Vatican to visit the Pope, and he got to give him a gift, and the gift he chose to give him was Undertale. For him to play through, to understand the many different levels of humanity and connection and art that can go into the game. And I think that's fantastic, because Undertale is, I think, one of the best games ever made. But I mean, again, Ryan and I have both gotten into Hollow Knight recently, so that's why it resonated even extra hard for us to see you guys kind of get wide-eyed, because that game is all about art direction and animation.
It's very good music. Very good music.
Especially. So when it comes to your guys' top five, when it comes to a top five, and I need you to define things. We can either do it this way, if we have time and you know the list. Whenever people ask me a top five, I'm like, do you want my favorite or my best? Because in my opinion, the best movie of all time is Citizen Kane, but my favorite movie of all time is The Fellowship of the Ring. So it's like those are two different things. So it's like when you're giving your top five animated movies of all time, maybe elaborate a bit. Like, is it based on cultural relevance? Is it based on the nostalgia, like David and the Lion King or Jessica and the Iron Giant and things like that?
Could it be not films? Could it be?
Of course.
Could it be TV as well?
Projects. I think top five animated works, because I think any medium should be open to this, because again, some games truly deserve to be in here as well. So especially as you guys being in the industry, but I mean, film's an easier thing to go. I mean, I know like my favorite animated film of all time is The Iron Giant. My top animated film of all time is extremely hard to decide, because we go into the weeds of like, it could be Snow White, it could be Sleeping Beauty, because they invented a technique of how to animate with their glass burning. And we could go into Isle of Dogs, we can go into Wallace and Gromit and The Curse of the Were-Rabbit and Tim Burton's accomplishments. It's like it's really hard when we try to be objective and we try to be filmic of like, who is the Mount Washington of animators. I just want to know, what are if you guys had to, if you were dying and you had a legacy, or if you had to go to a deserted island and you wanted 5 animated works to represent you. All right, so we'll just get into your top 5, and then anything you want to talk about before we close out, because at this point I want it to be your time, because I know you guys have plans at like 4 p.m.
Sure. Sorry.
Don't be sorry at all. We can literally do a follow-up. Like, we're so chill. Like, I had somebody on, we had him on like 3 times. He was an author who wrote about Stanley Kubrick, and we had so much fun with him.
Right.
I saw it. I didn't listen to it, but I saw it.
You saw it? Yeah. He came on a bunch of times, and it was probably, it's my personal favorite podcast we've done, because he came on and we just went deep dive into his movies. And like, I'm like, I'll have anybody on 50 times. We don't have a viewership. We just want to connect people. So
sure,
let's go. You guys can both decide who goes first. And it can be, and it's not end all be all, because my top 5 changes every week.
It's always when you ask that question, it's about 20 minutes later where you're like, that I changed my mind.
And it's difficult because like I think the proper top 5 should be on categorical of like what resonates with me from my childhood. What was the time I realized, wow, animation can be impressive? What was the first time I saw stop motion, 3D, 2D, like. Yeah. It's kind of like the YouTube channel Cinefix, if you've seen their videos.
Yeah, I love Cinefix. Yeah.
They don't do top 10s as in 10 being the worst, 1 being the best. Yeah. They do it based categorically. And that's how I like to do things. And it's like with animation, I don't know, it resonates with me so much subjectively that I almost throw all that out of the window. And I'm like, these are just the films that if I were to go to a deserted island, these are the animated films I want to watch for the rest of my days. And I could name them right now. I know them. Like,
I had to write them. I'm writing them down on my phone because I think for me, it's not top film. It's always just ones that I could watch constantly.
Exactly. And like I kind of want more of that because all of us here could end up at the same answers when we talk objectively. It's like we could talk about how good Finding Nemo was and the realism of nature. We could talk about WALL-E, we could talk about Spirited Away and Wallace and Gromit and Nightmare Before Christmas and Wes Anderson's Fantastic Mr. Fox. But I want to know, like, what makes us unique in our preferences? So either two of you can go first. And if me and Ryan want to interject, I don't know if Ryan, you know yours, but I know mine. I know my animated films. Again, Iron Giant with a Bullet is my number one.
With a bullet.
Do you want to go first?
No, I would love for you guys to go first.
Okay. All right. I have 5.5. Just because the other one is something I always watched as a kid, but it's more for a funny. Mine is definitely the Iron Giant. I love the style. I love the story. I love Kiki's Delivery Service because it's the first time I saw the use of animation without sound. And so much sound adds to the feeling of your emotions and all of that. And the moment where everything goes silent, I'll never forget. I loved it.
Are we going 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 with your list right now? Like, so you said 5.
I'm probably going from like my top to my low. Like they're
like
all.
No particular
I love
order.
them all equally. I don't think there's an ultimate.
You had Iron Giant as the one that resonated. Like that was, you said that first. That was pretty impressive. Why?
Just Why always if someone asks me what's your favorite animated movie, it's almost just become like an what's it called? An instinctive thing. I just like the Iron Giant because it didn't look like Disney. So it's one of the few movies that wasn't an anime and it was a movie that it looked so unique to me and I loved it. And I thought
it was a failure. It was the movie literally.
Oh, and it makes me terribly sad for that. But again, that's where I started to find out.
Like the film literally was animated by mostly interns and Brad Bird at Warner Brothers, and they gave it no money. And Blockbuster Video and Hollywood Video gave it its resurgence because he wrote,
which is great.
Yeah,
and it's something that I've come to learn.
Said Kiki's, which is fantastic. I think that's
Ooh, I
love Kiki. Kiki's Delivery Service is my favorite Miyazaki film, which is kind of controversial to say, but it's my favorite one.
I don't think it's. It's
people are always like, "Have you seen Spirited Away?"
You like what you like,
bro.
Yeah,
Delivery Service resonates with me so hard. Like,
I loved Sleeping Beauty because I thought it was moving art. Yes. I love it's how they made it look like a tapestry. I loved it. I didn't know at the time why I liked it. And now I know. Now I know why I enjoyed it a lot more.
That's awesome. That's a great pick.
I really like these two kind of go hand in hand, but Rock-a-Doodle and The Secret of NIMH, they are
Secret of NIMH!
Yeah, they're Don Bluth movies, and I like them because of the Bluth style. So, I could put all of his movies in together, but I like them a lot. And a very undersold one was Rock-a-Doodle, because it's a movie that I saw as a kid.
Rock-a-Doodle.
It's okay. It's okay.
Sure.
And then for one more, it's Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, and Demon Hunter. I can't say it. I will butcher the name, but it's a movie, or it's an anime that emerged from a manga last year. And
wow.
Much like Brotherhood, some of the action scenes, I don't know how. It blows my mind how someone was able to draw that forced perspective. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was just beautiful. Just beautiful. And then as a side note, the movie that I watched the most as a kid was called My Little Pony: Escape from Midnight Castle.
I kind of like your side note of like...
It's what I watched when I was young.
I want two side notes when you guys do this. The movie you watched the most as a kid, that was your kid movie. And then as an adult, what you truly think is a movie that is the highest of standard. And again, that is subjective. I want it to be based on like where you're like, I can't imagine having partaken in that film. Like for me right now, I'm not an animator, but Isle of Dogs would be that pick where I'm like, I can't even imagine working on that film. So like, what would be your pick, Jessica, for the film that would be almost like the heavenly gates of like, I can't even, it's so impressive to look at. I can't even imagine animating that film.
Ooh.
I know that's pressurous. So
we'll loop back to it, but it's probably a Ghibli film. Just because when they're drawn, well, it's hard to say because this is a go-to answer, but it's true. Akira, they drew everything, and I don't like the backgrounds. They drew the animated backgrounds, and I'm like, I don't know how you did that, and I think it's wonderful.
What's Akira animated at frame rate? Because it's like super high.
It's 60, isn't it?
It's
animes are usually done on 12.
It's done on 12s, but I think in terms of the processing on a Blu-ray disc, it's like a 60 frame output, which is crazy.
I don't know. I've never seen it on Blu-ray. I saw it on VHS only. And
we were doing research on it the other day, and we were like seeing 60 frame output. We're like, that cannot be it, right? Because that'd be wild looking.
I know that they 24. Did it on ones a lot. Oh, okay, because I would have had to Google this. I'm not sure. It looked great.
Again,
but it's animated on 2s and 3s, I think.
2s and 3s, but I think they've done a few ones, haven't they?
Probably somewhere in Akira.
Yeah.
That's a whole other conversation we'll have to have some time in the future when we have back on 2s and 3s.
Part 2.
I didn't even know what that was until I found my love for Spider-Verse, because they did both. What about you, David? What is your top 5 in no particular order, or your order of choice of all time?
Well, I mean, I have to include from my whole thing earlier, Lion King is in my top 5, and it's because of at the time, it's just its epic scale to me. It just felt like nothing I had seen or heard before.
Yeah,
it's the thing that made me want to get into animation. And then, as far as like legacy goes, I think Pinocchio is in my top 5. I think, and the reason I choose Pinocchio is because to me, Pinocchio is one of those films, especially for how long ago it was made and how it was still one of the first feature-length animated films ever made, that it encompasses such a range of emotion where you have everything from like, you have the heartfelt moments and like the homey moments of When You Wish Upon a Star, where it's like extraordinarily sort of fantastical.
Yeah.
Then you have sort of like scary and like frightening moments with Monstro the Whale, and these, the belly of the beast literally moments of like,
they feel that's like too when you watch them, the emotion that comes off the page.
Yeah, and it's crazy to look at both technically, but then like it's this terrifying scale of Monstro just swallowing up the main characters. And then you have moments that are still legitimately horrifying when he goes to Pleasure Island and the kids turn into donkeys. And you literally have, what's his face? Is it Lampwick? Who is the cigar smoking, like, come with me, Pinocchio. And he, it pans away from him. And you see the shadow of him turning into a donkey. And then it's kids in like, jail screaming for their mothers, and it's like, oh my god, it's so freaking scary.
It's fucking crazy. It's like watching Birds of the Fireflies. I'm like, how is the kid?
Yeah, and so all of that is in the same movie to me, and it's just like, wow, all of this happens in the same film. Like, and you have songs like what is it, An Actor's Life for Me or whatever it is, along with I've Got No Strings and
I Got No Strings. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so all that's happened. It's just crazy to me that that's all one movie. And then so then another one is The Incredibles.
Resignation there. That's on my top 5.
Yeah, The Incredibles is just fabulous. It was one of those things where it's like Pixar had done so many great movies up until that moment, and they brought in Brad Bird to shake things up. And
right after Iron Giant, dude.
Yeah, and he does a like mid-century spy action film with
Michael Giacchino.
Yeah,
the score.
Yeah, which was his first film, by the way. He had never done a feature film up to that moment. So
and look at what he did.
And then he just knocks a home run. So that one's amazing, and also that's another one where it's like it was a stylistic departure for Pixar, where it was like, oh yeah, it was their first time.
It was the first film that was rated PG. It was the first film that broke the 2-hour mark, and this was, I think, when I talk to people, I often talk to younger students when we were still students at the University of Cincinnati and DAP about our animated preferences, and I would often rave about The Incredibles, and most of the young ass Gen Z kids are like, superhero films are so washed out. I'm like, dude, this film came out in 2004.
Yeah, this is before.
There was nothing. I'm like, he took James Bond and like Hitchcockian storytelling and mixed it with the superhero genre and added like political influence to it. And I'm like, you have no idea how insane that was for me to watch as a 9-year-old.
It's really unique because it's a family film as well. It's no singular superhero movie. It's how do you operate as a unit.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's a sitcom. Like, that's what I like about Brad Bird's film when he has true creative control. Like The Iron Giant was very similar, where everybody was fully fleshed out, and similar to Miyazaki, there's true villains and true protagonists, but it's like you can understand everybody's viewpoints, and that's what was great about The Incredibles. I could do a 2-hour podcast on why The Incredibles is a special film. I mean, I really love that movie. That's my favorite Pixar movie of all time. So
nice. Yeah, me too.
So you only named a couple. So yeah,
what's 3?
You?
Another one, Nightmare Before Christmas. And
elaborate, because a lot of people. I've never seen the full Nightmare Before Christmas before. I need to watch it.
Oh.
It's easily my favorite stop motion animated. And then
wow.
But the reason I picked that one out in particular is because that's a film that to me is where all the creative leadership on that film, in my opinion, was operating at maximum awesome. And by that I mean, like, you had, Henry Selick directing, and he's a great visionary stop motion animator and director.
Yeah.
Along with I think Bo Welsh worked on that, who's an incredible production designer.
On Nightmare?
I think on Nightmare, because he works a lot with both Henry and Tim Burton. Then you have Tim Burton, who wrote this story and sort of sprung it out of a short film or a short story idea of his. And then of course you have Danny Elfman, who is amazing. And then I think he did some of his best work of his life on that film. So I think it's really just like
in the 90s, it was just like from 89 to 99, whether like most of it I know is Batman and like
Beetlejuice.
So you guys are animators. One of my favorite things of all time is the Batman the Animated Series. Just like I would tattoo it on my body. Like, I love that series so much. But like Danny Elfman and what he's done with other works too, like continuing the like edgy kind of vibe is really impressive.
Well, it's funny because it's Nightmare. Up until that moment, especially around that era, he was mostly known for doing sort of dark. He self-identified as somebody who made dark opera, he used to say, and dark old phantasmagory style theater, and so when he's been quoted as saying that, like, he looks at Nightmare as it's his operetta, it's his opera piece, and then it just comes to life in animation. But that's why I think of Nightmare as on my top movies. I think it's just everyone who worked on that movie was doing the best work of their careers. And
I agree, because almost every frame it was like they were trying to make the best frame of their career. Like when you look at, I said I haven't finished. When I say I haven't finished Nightmare, I haven't sat down from beginning to end and watched it for some reason. I don't know why. I've seen that movie in some sense from like 17 times. I've sat down and watched it. I've studied it. I think almost every single shot, kind of like what Wes Anderson does now with like Isle of Dogs and Forward, they were trying to make, you could just, iconic shots. I mean, I think one of the most iconic shots of all time is him walking on that mountaintop, moonlit background.
Yeah.
And so I fully agree that when most people think of stop motion, they think of The Nightmare Before Christmas. I think there's a reason why. And was that your 3? How many do we?
That's 4.
4, yeah.
And then I wrote down a couple. And it's tough. It's tough for me to decide on what the 5th one is.
Let's just keep it open. Let's go.
But I mean, the thing is I as a kid, because the thing I can't deny is like when I was in, from like age 8 to like age 14, I was a huge Bluthie. Like I loved Don Bluth movies. And for the same reason, I was like, wow, it looks so different from Disney. It has a very different tone from Disney. Yeah. Like All Dogs Go to Heaven. Like for me, All Dogs and Secret of NIMH were my 2 big, like Don Bluth movies that I couldn't stop watching. And I loved the aesthetic of them. I thought they were so cool and they felt grittier to me. And like in All Dogs Go to Heaven, there's a sequence where he goes to hell. And it's
All Dogs Go to Heaven is fucking awesome, dude. Like, that movie is, if you're a child and you watch that movie, it's one of those Disney films that feels like it didn't fit the Disney formula, and that's why it's so
good. This is sort of a side note, but like, so one of my assignments that was given to me when I was in graduate school was they told me that I needed to go out and interview a director of animation for their archives. I went to UCLA, so the UCLA archives, and so it was like sort of lazy, but sort of not. I'd like to say, I chose Gil Kenan because Gil Kenan had very recently graduated from our program and then was directing the movie Monster House. And
I love that movie personally.
And I chose him because I'm like, well, I know that Gil's going to have a really interesting perspective on animation because he's making a film that doesn't look like normal animation. And his student film definitely didn't look like normal animation. It was really weird. And him and I talked about the Bluth movies in our interview. And and so I only bring him up because I want to give him credit for having said this. But I talked to him a little bit about, and he told me that he was trying to do this with Monster House, where we talked about Secret of NIMH, and that was a jumping off point for the whole Bluth series. And he's like, what I really appreciate about the Don Bluth films is that he was using animation as a way to like introduce kids to like a much richer tone of filmmaking than they would normally be exposed to, because he was like, he goes, almost every Don Bluth film hides an adult film inside of a children's film. And point. He's like, it's framed as a children's story, and there's like music numbers and everything, and yet there's terrifying adult film stuff going on inside of these movies. And he tried to do that with Monster House as well. And it's true. It's like we said, where it's like you have in All Dogs Go to Heaven, you have like the musical sequence of like, the more you give, the more you're going to get, which is like the most hokey, cheesy music sequence. And then Charlie Goes to Hell as well.
It was very dull. Like I felt like that era, Disney didn't often lean into that, because like for me, like I grew up on watching Batman and Justice League and stuff where the cartoons felt all ages, but Disney wasn't quite there. But then like some of the others, like what you're talking about, those films on the lesser known end, for lack of a better word, definitely hit on those themes. So that's what I find interesting. So your number one is somewhere around like a conglomerate of like on like what you would consider.
Well, and I think Lion King also does that. I think Lion King is a animated kids film that has very adult moments in it, everything from Simba dying to the terrifying elephant graveyard to the Be Prepared is not your average musical sequence, So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. It's funny. Go ahead. The name of my thesis that I did with Gil was called The Pixar Effect, but it was like, that's sort of the title of my thesis was irrelevant, but it's based on another guy's thesis that was called The Disney Effect. And
I feel like I've heard of that before. I think I've read
the Disney Effect was something that was, people bring this up in terms of like the Walt Disney Company doing what it did in the 30s and the 40s was a lot of people said was a blessing and a curse. And to skip ahead for 1 second would be like, I think we're out of this era now, but back in the 90s especially, it was scary because people say like, yeah, it's awesome that the Disney Company was able to basically bring to the world the idea of a feature-length animated, film, which had never been done. But it also sort of put animated filmmaking into this box of, if you're going to do it, it's going to have songs in it, and it's going to be like for kids, kind of.
Check the boxes. Like we have a demographic for this, right?
And so then it became this thing of like Gil Kenan in my interview, I think he said it best, where he said, I don't blame Disney, I blame the people that tried to imitate Disney, where they looked at the animated film and they said, well, the only way we're going to be successful with this is if we just make something that's similar to a Disney film. And thank goodness, I think now, after everything, we've come very far with animated filmmaking, that I think we're out of that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, for a while that was a little challenging.
I like
to do anything that strayed.
Like, your guys' list both speaks to kind of like the styles you resonate with and what influences you. Because for me, since I don't animate, a lot of it is mostly just from childhood resonance. It's things, and there's probably two that have broken through post-adolescence, and those mean, I would say, if an animated movie can make your top 5 list out of your childhood, that shows that it's one of the best movies ever made, because people do associate animation for some reason as resonating easier with your brain when you're younger. And as you're older, if an animated film can break through that mold, if you study movies and study cinema, like for Spider-Verse and Isle of Dogs and anything Miyazaki has done to literally make me cry and change my mind on how I view movies. Like, what are the first 2 animated movies for both of you that made you each cry? For me, it was Up. Pixar's Up was the first film ever to make me cry, and it was an animated movie. And then going back as an adult now, if I watch movies like Lilo and Stitch and Finding Nemo, I'm crying in them. Like, they mean so much to me. So, like, what were the first animated films that made you each cry? Do you know those?
Lion King. I will never not cry at The Lion King.
Wow.
And it's a movie that I've said I'll only see once. And I have seen it. It was Grave of the Fireflies.
That movie.
I've never known such sorrow as a young person watching that movie, going, oh, I like Hayao Miyazaki.
You watched it young? You watched that movie young?
Quite young. I didn't fully realize what it was about. And then I watched it.
It's not a kid's movie at all. The movie's very tragic.
There's no happiness in that movie. So even if I think about it, I'll cry. It's that movie will get me going.
One of the best movies. What about you, David? Has any animated movie ever made you cry?
Oh yeah, I don't know about first. I don't know if I can think of one that first made me cry, but
interesting.
I think one of the big ones is Inside Out for me. I mean, I know that's very recent.
I've only seen it once. I need to see it again.
Oh man, Inside Out is so amazing, and it's just that's one where it's hard to even think about.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't talk about too much.
I don't think of Inside Out that often. I need to rewatch. Like, for me, like, nowadays I'm with you guys. Like, if you love movies, almost anything can make you emotional. And when I was going through a particularly rough time when Spider-Verse came out, and I watched that movie 5 times in theaters, mostly by myself, just because it made me feel something in general. It's a movie that could bring me to tears. As a lover of Spider-Man, superhero films, and animation alike, I'm like, this film makes me cry. Like The Iron Giant, like my top 5 is like The Iron Giant, The Incredibles, Toy Story, almost as a legacy, because most people say their most quotable movies like Pulp Fiction or The Big Lebowski or something. I'm like, dude, I'm quoting Toy Story 1 way too often and no one understands it, and it's very hysterical. And then in recent years, a couple of Miyazaki films, in the last few months actually, have really broken. I mean, when I watched Spirited Away, it like broke my brain as to what like could make me feel emotion while watching a animated film. So, and then Lilo and Stitch is like probably my number 2 or my number 1 because I grew up watching that. And it's funny. I think animation is difficult more so than live action when we try to choose a top 5, because it's not just how it resonates with us. It's because there's something to appreciate in the beauty of the art direction, and that's important. Is there anything else, you guys, before we wrap it up for this? I'm sure we'll meet again and do this again sometime. Is there anything else you guys want to touch on or would love to talk about on our first podcast here?
If I had more time, I would. Sadly, I'll have to duck out soon, but
that's the thing. Well, we can do it again, guys. Like we can do it again, and we can set like it does not have to be 3 hours like today. I mean, thank you so much for taking so much time to talk with us. I mean, it flew by.
Thank you too. Yes, thank you for such meaningful questions. It was so nice to meet both of you. Like, thank you.
Yeah. No, like I just thought you guys were fascinating from the moment I heard about you both. And there's so much of your career I would love to dive into, and usually it's more formal. We're in a studio, it's not during the pandemic, but I'd love to meet up again and do this again sometime and like elaborate. I want to talk about I want to talk about less formal things. I want to know about like your guys' cocktail culture phenomenon.
Sure. Yeah.
And we can get into topics that
buy more rum.
I'd love to talk about Imagineering. I'd love to talk about Blue Sky.
That's the thing. We can put it on a schedule. And David, David kept apologizing. He's like, I'm so sorry, I'm replying late. I'm like, bro, we are all so busy. Half the time I don't even notice you're replying late, so you don't even have to say it. We can schedule another one. I mean, but we can make it shorter because it's hard to do a 3-hour session, but we can do like 30 minute to 1 hour sessions and
I'm sure you'll cut this down into the usable bits as well.
I'm so sorry.
We cut this down into one thing, and then we could do like a couple more 30-minute sessions and make it into one episode. And that'd be I would love to talk about Disney, and I would love to talk about the two of you guys with what it's like actually making it in the industry. And I really want to touch on survival in an industry that is so intimidating.
That'd be great.
For me, I find it very inspiring to talk to people who I feel like I can connect with as human beings that are doing something that I find so admirable. You know, I would love to talk about that. So
great.
You guys have been fantastic, and we can dive into pretty much more things in the future. We can hash out those details. So thank you so much. You guys are awesome human beings. Do you guys want to give? So when it comes to last before we leave. What are some things you're working on now on the record you can promote? Like, do you guys have social media channels or any campaigns you want people to turn to? And sometimes when I ask people this question, it's not even their personal projects that they're working with. Sometimes people are like, hey, wear a mask, it's COVID-19, just be a good human being. So whatever you want to say to close things out is up to you.
Yeah, be safe.
Be safe, Take care of each other.
See Vivo.
Oh yeah.
She's working on a film called Vivo.
It's been greenlit, so I'm working on a film called Vivo. It's wrapping up in the next few weeks. It's going to be hopefully out in the summer. It's a wonderful film. Lin-Manuel Miranda has a great hand in it. It's got 2 fantastic directors. So
for 2021 summer?
2021. They have not released trailers yet. But it's great. Sorry, I should say it follows a young Kinkajou in
That's
Cuba.
An animal.
It follows a young Kinkajou who has to travel to Miami. So it's great. It's adorable and funny and beautiful. And how about you?
I'm working on we're doing a feature adaptation of the kids graphic novel series called The Bad Guys. It's a popular 7-book series, I think, that follows the tale of all of the characters that are usually associated in fiction with being bad guys. So the big bad wolf.
I love that.
the shark, like a shark, basically like the shark from Jaws, a tarantula, a snake, and a piranha. That's right. Great. And it's sort of like Ocean's 11 combined with Pulp Fiction, combined with fairy tales, and and simply put, the story is, what if the bad guys, in order to survive, had to try to become good guys?
Yeah.
And that's sort of what the story is.
And that's all on the record, right? We can have that in the podcast. Okay.
Yeah, that's coming out as of right now. It's supposed to be coming out in the springtime of 2022.
Nice.
So we'll be working on that all this upcoming year. So
guys, you both, honestly, I mean this genuinely, you're both such lovely people, and I feel like you're very good at articulating your stances. And I would love to, now that we've had a conversation and we ran down our time of 3 hours, I would love to do this again. You guys know what you want to talk about. I want to touch on even more South Park, even more Disney. I want to talk about like what movies mean to us, and like why we are working in an industry that is almost set against us in terms of odds and stigma. And we'd love to touch on that. And maybe within the next couple of months, we can reschedule something to do that.
Sure.
Sounds great.
Fantastic. And again, we'll do it shorter because I think it's not efficient to do 3 hour sessions unless it's the first meet. But
I don't envy you guys having to edit this later. I'm really sorry about that.
We love it. We actually love it because we get to listen to something that we find interesting. That's why we do it. Is oftentimes Ryan, mostly just Ryan, it's not myself. We get to listen. We get to talk to people who truly have a down-to-earth approach to talking about what they love doing, and editing it is rather fun because we get a lot of insight from it. And you guys are so relatable and fun, and I want to know more about you guys and get into the quirks of who you are, and we can do that on a follow-up if you're down. I don't know if you're down.
Yeah, that sounds great.
But thank you so much. I mean, it means so much that you guys took the time on your Sunday and your day off to spend time with us and talk about what you've been up to lately, and it means a lot. So we really
thank you for calling.
It was a fun conversation. I really appreciate it.
So yeah, we will definitely do this again. This has been, for now, AVHD podcast on Spotify and YouTube without video. And for now, we're thinking about coming up with a new name, and Ryan and I are shuffling different ideas in our minds, and we might come up with something creative. Otherwise, AVHD is here to stay. For now, we will keep you posted on our Twitters and our Instagrams as things continue to post. And thank you so much, David and Jessica. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season here in the midst of December 2020.
You too.
You too. Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Stay safe and have a good holiday.
Yeah.
And good luck moving.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. I'm already here. Ryan's coming here. Austin, Texas is great. If you guys ever come to Austin, by the way, now that we can.
Yeah.
I would love to come down and see it.
You guys let us know. We might be doing like a two bedroomer merge. Like, I live in a building downtown, and they have crazy deals right now because of COVID. I'm like, Ryan, we can upgrade to a 2-bedroom, or you get a 1-bedroom across the hall. If you guys are ever in town, let us know, man. This town is awesome.
I want to go.
We're on 6th Street, right downtown. It's fantastic. Anyway, thank you guys so much. It means a lot, seriously, during these schedules for you guys to come on and talk to us about things. So
great.
I would love to do another show where we can kind of pick your brain about some more personal stuff as far as what makes you guys tick goes, if you're down to do that. And it can be a lot shorter, and we can plan it out more strategically. So
sounds good.
Great.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you guys. It was so nice.
It was so nice to meet you. Thank you. Thank you,
you guys
Marissa.
are lovely. You guys are fantastic. Seriously, you guys got it going on. Appreciate it.
Go Cincy.
Yeah, go Cincy.
Go Bearcats, baby.
Yeah.
Let's go Bearcats.
All the way, baby. This is the year.
I hope.
All right, guys. Have a good Sunday night.
Have a good Sunday. Yeah. See ya.
See ya.
Bye.